When my son told me he was marrying a beautiful woman from Mexico, I smiled and said, "If she makes you happy, then I'm happy too." But when that same woman sat at my dinner table, smiling sweetly, and called me a foolish old woman in Spanish, thinking I couldn't understand a single word, I simply smiled back and passed her the bread. What she didn't know was that the language she mocked me in was the native tongue of my late husband. And from that very moment, as I sat there in silence, I began weaving a trap, one she would spend the rest of her life regretting. My name is Evelyn Brooks, and I'm 68 years old. I live alone in Savannah, Georgia, in a modest brick house surrounded by old oak trees and the soft hum of cicadas. Mornings here are peaceful, the kind of peace that comes after a lifetime of noise. I wake early, make my coffee just the way Henry used to like it, and tend to my roses before the sun climbs too high. For most people my age, life slows down. But I've never been one for slowing. I spent 40 years as a real estate consultant, reading contracts, people, and lies wrapped in smiles. You learn a lot about human nature when you negotiate property. You learn who's genuine and who's pretending to be. My husband, Henry Brooks, passed away 8 years ago. He was a good man, patient, sharp, and endlessly kind. He was Hispanic, and from him I learned Spanish. He used to tell me, "Evelyn, if you want to truly understand people, learn the language they think in." So I did. I learned every word, every tone, every hidden meaning. I never imagined it would one day save my son. My son, Daniel Brooks, lives in London, halfway across the world. He's 38 now, smart, successful, and always in a hurry. He works as a financial consultant, advising companies on how to grow their wealth. We talk over video calls once or twice a week. He tells me about his city life, I tell him about my garden. We laugh. We miss each other. And deep down, I still think of him as the little boy who used to run barefoot through our yard, his laughter echoing against the Georgia sun. Then one afternoon, the call came that changed everything. I was in the garden pruning roses when his voice, bright and full of excitement, came through the speaker. "Mom, you won't believe it, I met someone." I smiled. "Oh? Who's the lucky girl?" "Her name's Lucia," he said. "She's from Mexico. We met at a business summit in Mexico City. Mom, she's incredible. And," he paused, almost laughing from joy, "we're getting married." The pruning shears froze in my hand. "Married?" I repeated softly. "Already?" "Mom, I know it's fast," he said, "but when you know, you just know. She's everything I've ever wanted. Kind, smart, and real. You'll love her." Kind, smart, real. The 3 words every mother hopes to hear. But somewhere beneath the warmth of his voice, I felt something else. A quiet tug of unease, the kind that whispers rather than shouts. I'd spent my life studying faces, reading intentions, sensing when something didn't fit. And something here didn't. Still, I kept my voice steady. "If she makes you happy, Daniel, then I'll be happy too." He laughed. "I knew you'd say that. You always trust people, Mom." I smiled faintly. "Not always, son. I just give them the chance to prove who they really are." When the call ended, I stood by the window, watching the sunlight slide across the porch. The wind carried the scent of my roses, sharp and sweet. And in that soft southern breeze, I heard Henry's voice again, calm and wise. "Don't stop people from walking their paths, Evelyn. Just make sure you're watching where they lead." I didn't know it then, but the next time I saw Lucia, sitting at my table, smiling with that perfect face, it wouldn't be a meeting. It would be the beginning of war. It was a soft spring evening in Savannah when they arrived. I remember it clearly, the faint hum of crickets outside, the smell of lemon pie cooling on the counter, and that particular stillness a house holds before guests step in. Daniel's voice came first, cheerful and familiar. "Mom." Then came another, smooth, melodic, touched with a faint accent. "Mrs. Brooks, it's such a pleasure to finally meet you." I turned from the kitchen doorway and saw her, Lucia. She was beautiful, yes. The kind of beauty that photographs well, symmetrical, careful, calculated. Her hair fell perfectly over one shoulder, and her smile looked like it had been practiced in a mirror. Behind her stood her parents, Miguel and Theresa, dressed elegantly, both carrying an air of quiet superiority that didn't quite belong in my modest home. I wiped my hands on a towel and extended my arm. "Welcome to Savannah," I said warmly. Lucia leaned forward and kissed the air beside my cheek. "Oh, I've heard so much about you," she said, her eyes sweeping over my living room like a realtor inspecting property. I smiled faintly. She's the kind who notices price tags before people. We sat down to dinner: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and Henry's favorite wine, which I'd saved for special occasions. Daniel was radiant, so proud, so in love. He spoke animatedly, telling stories about London, about the wedding plans, about how Lucia wanted to move to the US after they married. "She loves America, Mom," he said, looking at her like she was the sun. Lucia smiled, a slow, graceful curve of lips. "Yes," she said softly. "Your country is so full of opportunity." Her tone was innocent enough. But to me, someone who's heard every kind of sales pitch, it sounded like strategy. Her parents chimed in politely. Miguel talked about their export business in Mexico City. Theresa spoke of vineyards they once owned. But something about their stories didn't fit. The timelines clashed. The details were vague. I listened quietly, nodding in all the right places, while my mind did what it had always done best: observe. Every movement, every glance, every tiny expression. And then, during dessert, it happened. A small, almost invisible moment. One that changed everything. Daniel was talking about his work, explaining how his company had recently been valued at a few $1 million. The number slipped out casually, just conversation for him. But I saw what came next. Lucia's eyes flicked, just for a second, toward her mother. A glance. A spark. A shared understanding. Theresa's lips curved in a quick, restrained smile. And then gone. Like it never happened. If I hadn't spent my life studying micro-expressions, I would have missed it. But I didn't. I knew that look. It wasn't love. It was calculation. Still, I said nothing. When dinner ended, Daniel excused himself to get Lucia a glass of water. The moment he left the room, Lucia leaned slightly toward her parents. Her voice lowered, soft, fast, confident. And she switched to Spanish. It was the language of my husband, and the language she believed I couldn't understand. "Ella parece amable," she said. "Pero es una vieja tonta." She seems kind, but she's an old fool. Theresa let out a quiet laugh. "Why su hijo?" "And her son?" Lucia's smile sharpened. "Perfecto. Innocent. Rico. Mi bolito dorado." Perfect. Naive. Rich. My golden ticket. I didn't move. Not even an inch. I simply folded my napkin, as if I hadn't just heard her sentence me in my own house. When Daniel returned, Lucia was already smiling again, her tone as gentle as honey. She touched his hand, looked at him with those soft, staged eyes, and said, "Your mother is lovely. I can't wait to be part of this family." He squeezed her hand. He believed her. Of course he did. And me? I smiled, poured her another glass of wine, and nodded. But inside, something cold and razor-sharp had settled. That night, after they left, I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd insulted me, and stared at the empty glasses. Outside, the moon hung low and silent, like it was watching me think. I whispered to the stillness, "You picked the wrong old fool, sweetheart." I didn't sleep that night. The clock kept ticking, louder than usual, as if it was daring me to do something. I sat in my armchair, Henry's old blanket wrapped around my shoulders, thinking. Anger wasn't the right word for what I felt. It was sharper than that. Clearer. It wasn't rage, it was resolve. For 40 years, I'd studied contracts, negotiated deals, and seen greed dressed up as charm. Lucia was no different. Only this time, the property at stake wasn't land. It was my son. By dawn, I had a plan. I made coffee, opened my old contacts list, and found the number I hadn't dialed in nearly a decade, David Morris, an old colleague and close friend from my consulting days. David had left the US years ago to work in London as an immigration and corporate attorney. If anyone could dig up the truth without raising suspicion, it was him. When he answered, his voice carried the same calm authority I remembered. "Evelyn Brooks," he said, half laughing. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you again." "I wish this was a social call," I replied. "Something wrong?" "Yes. Her name's Lucia." There was a pause, then the rustle of papers. "Tell me everything." I told him. Every word. Every glance. Every Spanish sentence that fell from her lips. When I finished, David exhaled slowly. "You think she's after money or citizenship?" "Both," I said. "And she's clever enough to make him believe it's love." He didn't argue. He knew better than to doubt my instincts. "I'll start from my side," he said. "Give me a week. I'll see what I can find in her records. Business, travel, anything public." "Discretion, David," I reminded him. He chuckled softly. "Evelyn, you forget who taught me that." That week passed slower than any I can remember. Daniel called often, bubbling with wedding plans, his voice light and hopeful. He sent pictures, Lucia in floral dresses, her arm hooked around his. Each image felt like a warning wrapped in color. One afternoon, I went to the town library, claiming I was researching foreign investment laws. Old habits die hard. I cross-referenced online registries, foreign companies, import licenses tied to Mexico City. Half the names Lucia's parents mentioned at dinner didn't exist. Their so-called export business was a dead company, legally dissolved 4 years ago. My hands tightened around the printout. So they'd lied. Not just to Daniel. To me. In my own home. That night, as the rain tapped against the windows, my phone rang. "David." His voice was grave. "Evelyn, I checked everything. Lucia's family is in deep financial trouble. Their business collapsed after a fraud investigation 2 years ago. Her parents are under review for tax evasion in Mexico. And Lucia," he paused, "Lucia herself applied for a UK fiancé visa 2 years ago with another man. It was rejected due to inconsistencies in the relationship." My stomach tightened. "So she's done this before?" "Yes. And if your son marries her, she'll gain both financial security and a pathway to US citizenship." For a moment, silence filled the line. I stared out at the dark savannah night, the magnolia trees swaying in the wind. "She won't get either," I said finally. David's tone softened. "What are you planning, Evelyn?" "Nothing yet," I said quietly. "Not until I have proof that even Daniel can't deny." The next day, I started laying my groundwork. I called an old friend at the county courthouse, a clerk who still owed me a favor from a land dispute years back. Through her, I arranged discreet access to marriage license records and financial disclosure requests. I began to build a file, not on paper, but on instinct. Names, dates, connections, phone numbers. Everything Lucia and her parents had mentioned, I verified. Every lie they told, I recorded. But I knew something else. Direct confrontation would only push Daniel away. To expose her, I needed to make her feel safe. Let her believe she'd already won. So I did what any real strategist does. I smiled. And I waited. One evening, Daniel called again. "Mom, Lucia wants to visit Savannah again. She says she misses your cooking." I forced a gentle laugh. "That's sweet of her. Tell her she's always welcome." But as I hung up the phone, I whispered under my breath, "Come back, darling. This time, I'll be ready." 2 weeks later, the doorbell rang again. Through the window I saw a flash of red, Lucia's dress, and Daniel's tall frame beside her. They were back sooner than I'd expected. Exactly what I needed. I opened the door with the same warm smile she remembered. "Well, look who's here. I was just about to make coffee." Lucia laughed lightly. "You always know how to make us feel at home." Her tone was honey, her eyes were calculation. Daniel carried 2 suitcases. "We'll stay the weekend, Mom. Lucia wanted to see Savannah again." I nodded. "Of course." Inside, every move I made looked ordinary, setting the kettle, folding napkins, talking about weather, but each word, each glance was placed with purpose. That evening, I invited them to stroll through the garden. The roses were blooming. Henry's old wind chime clinked softly in the breeze. Lucia walked beside me, pretending interest. "These are beautiful," she said. I smiled. "Thank you. They grow best when you trim the weak stems before they spread." She didn't notice the meaning. Daniel did. He gave me a quick look, half amused, half puzzled. Later, while they were busy with their phones, I slipped into the study and called David on a secure line. "She's here," I whispered. "Good," he replied. "The reports from Mexico just arrived. Their debts are worse than we thought, and she's using a false business visa. I'll send you copies tonight." "Perfect," I said. "Tomorrow we start." The next morning, I acted like any proud mother. I offered breakfast, asked polite questions, smiled at all the right moments. Then, while Daniel stepped out to take a work call, I looked directly at Lucia. "So," I said softly, "how's your family's export business these days?" She froze, just for half a second, then recovered. "Oh, it's wonderful. We've expanded into Spain." I nodded slowly. "Spain? Interesting. My late husband was from Valencia. I might still know people there." Her fork slipped against the plate with a faint clink. The silence that followed told me everything. Behind her polished manners was panic, a crack she couldn't hide. I didn't press further. Not yet. That night, when Daniel fell asleep, Lucia went outside for fresh air. I followed quietly, standing by the back door where shadows hid me. She was on the phone, speaking fast in Spanish. "Tranquila, mama. Todo va bien. El dinero pronto será nuestro." "Relax, Mom. Everything's fine. The money will be ours soon." I recorded every word. When she came back inside, I was sitting at the table with 2 mugs of tea. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Old people don't sleep much," I replied calmly. "We remember too much." Her smile faltered. I knew then that the trap was tightening. She just hadn't realized it yet. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains like nothing was wrong. Birds chirped, the kettle whistled, and Lucia hummed quietly as she scrolled through her phone at the breakfast table. She had no idea that every moment of her visit was now part of a strategy, mine. Daniel left early for a quick meeting downtown, giving me the perfect window. I poured Lucia another cup of coffee and said lightly, "You know, dear, I've been thinking. We never properly celebrated your engagement. Why don't we host a small dinner this weekend? Just family and a few close friends." Her eyes flickered, surprise first, then delight. "That sounds wonderful, Mrs. Brooks." "Please, I said with a gentle smile. Call me Evelyn. She didn't know it, but that dinner would be her stage, and her downfall. That afternoon, I called David again. It's time, I said. He knew what I meant. I'll send everything over, he replied. Lucia's financial records, immigration files, and the transcripts from her last visa denial. You'll have proof beyond question. Good, I said. Bring them yourself. And, David, I want this done right. As always, he promised. Next, I made arrangements with the Magnolia Club, Savannah's oldest and most elegant venue. Its chandeliers, grand piano, and marble floors had hosted governors and judges. It would be the perfect place for what I intended, a celebration dressed as exposure. The manager, an old client from my real estate days, greeted me warmly. Mrs. Brooks. Back to making magic again. I smiled faintly. Something like that. I booked the ballroom, arranged catering, and asked the staff for one special favor: access to the projector and audio system. I told them I'd be showing a family video montage. That part wasn't entirely a lie. When Daniel returned that evening, I could see how happy he was. Mom, you're really doing this for us? I touched his hand. Of course, son. Every mother dreams of seeing her child's new beginning. Lucia hugged me then, whispering a soft thank you that sounded more rehearsed than sincere. I hugged her back just long enough to whisper in return, "You're welcome, darling. I just hope you're ready for it." The following days were all preparation, outwardly calm, inwardly meticulous. I sent out invitations to friends, neighbors, and a few acquaintances from Henry's old firm. Everyone thought it was a warm Southern gesture, a proud mother's celebration. Meanwhile, I spent hours reviewing the documents David had brought. Lucia's falsified financial statements, her parents' tax evasion notice, and the voice recording from my garden. I labeled everything carefully in a presentation file. Slide 1, Welcome to the Brooks family. Slide 2, The truth about Lucia. On the evening before the dinner, David stopped by my house. He wore a dark suit and that lawyer's calm that never quite left him. He placed a folder on my table. These are notarized. Once shown, they're public record. Thank you, David, I said quietly. He studied me for a moment. Are you sure about this? You could just tell Daniel privately. I shook my head. He's in love. He won't believe words. He'll believe proof, and humiliation leaves a stronger mark on liars than warnings ever do. David sighed. You haven't changed. No, I said. I just stopped forgiving. The next day, everything was ready. The ballroom glowed under soft golden lights. Tables gleamed with crystal glasses and silver cutlery. Guests arrived one by one, laughing, congratulating, completely unaware of the storm that was about to break. Daniel looked radiant in his navy suit. Lucia wore red, bold, confident, dangerous. She kissed my cheek and said, "Evelyn, this is perfect. You have such good taste." I smiled, steady and polite. Oh dear. You have no idea. As dinner began, I raised my glass. To new beginnings, I said softly. And to truth, because no relationship survives without it. Lucia laughed lightly, unaware of what those words meant. But David, standing near the projector, gave me a small nod. Everything was set. Tomorrow morning, Lucia's name would be in the papers. But tonight, she'd face the truth in a room full of witnesses. The night of the dinner felt almost cinematic. Chandeliers flickering, silverware clinking softly, and a low murmur of conversation filling the ballroom. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. I stood near the entrance as the last of the guests arrived, my posture calm, my heart deliberate. Every smile I gave had purpose. Daniel looked happier than I had seen him in years. He greeted his friends, his arm proudly around Lucia's waist. She was radiant, dressed in crimson silk, a diamond necklace glinting under the lights. To everyone else, she looked like elegance personified. To me, she looked like a mask, one I was about to remove. Dinner flowed with small talk and laughter. I kept my composure, asking about London weather, complimenting Lucia's dress, nodding at her parents' exaggerated tales of business ventures. Miguel spoke with his usual false confidence about overseas clients, while Theresa added soft affirmations. Every lie was carefully rehearsed, every sentence shaped for image. They didn't know that I had each one documented, time-stamped, cross-checked, and waiting in the folder David held at the side of the room. Dessert was being served when I gently tapped my glass. The room quieted instantly. I smiled, steady, gracious, almost warm. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying just enough weight to silence every whisper. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight. This evening is special, not just for my son Daniel and his lovely fiancée Lucia, but for me as well. Because tonight, I get to honor both love and truth, the two foundations of any lasting relationship." Lucia beamed, turning slightly toward Daniel as if she were the star of the moment. "Perfect," I continued. "When Henry, my late husband, was alive, he used to say something that stayed with me: never make a promise you can't keep, and never pretend to be something you're not, because the truth always finds a voice." I paused. Tonight, I'd like to share something in his honor. A small tribute, in Spanish. A murmur went through the room. Daniel smiled proudly. "Mom learned Spanish from my dad," he said softly to Lucia. Lucia's expression brightened, and then froze when I switched languages. "Esta es la historia de un águila," I began. "Que abrió su hogar a un pequeño pájaro herido. El águila lo dio cala, alimento y amor. Pero el pájaro no vino por refugio. Vino por el oro del nido." A few guests nodded politely, not understanding the words. But Lucia did. Her eyes widened slightly, a tremor at the corner of her mouth. "Y cuando el águila descubrió la verdad," I continued, "no grito, no peleo. Solo abrió sus alas. Y dijo que el mundo viera quien era el ladrón." I clicked the small remote in my hand. Behind me, the ballroom lights dimmed. The projector flickered on. The first slide appeared on the screen, a smiling picture of Lucia and Daniel, taken during their trip to Mexico. The crowd murmured in admiration. Then came slide 2. Financial documents. Company dissolution records from Mexico. Gasps rippled through the tables. Slide 3, Lucia's visa denial letter from the UK, her previous failed engagement, stamped application rejected due to fraudulent intent. The whispers turned sharp. Chairs creaked. Daniel's expression froze mid-smile. Then came slide 4, the audio file. Lucia's voice filled the hall, projected clear and merciless. "Tranquila, mama. Todo va bien. El dinero pronto será nuestro. Relax, mom. Everything's fine. The money will be ours soon." The sound echoed, deadly calm. Lucia stood motionless, her face drained of color. Miguel rose halfway, stammering, This is a misunderstanding." David stepped forward, his voice cool and professional. "Not a misunderstanding, Mr. Reyes. These documents are verified by the Mexican Finance Authority and the U.S. Consulate. Your daughter attempted immigration fraud twice, and now attempted financial fraud on U.S. soil." The room went silent. Lucia's breath came fast, her hands trembling against her skirt. Daniel looked from me to her, disbelief cracking his expression. "Lucia, tell me this isn't true." She opened her mouth. No words came. Her parents avoided her eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin, desperate. "Daniel, I can explain." But I cut in softly, my tone calm as winter rain. "No, dear. You've done enough explaining. Tonight, you show us who you really are." Lucia turned to me, eyes blazing with humiliation. "You planned this," she hissed. "Yes," I said. "And you walked right into it." Security from the club quietly escorted her and her parents outside as the murmurs grew. Daniel sat frozen at the table, the world around him dissolving into disbelief. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, son," I said gently. "But you deserved the truth, not a performance." He didn't answer. "Not yet. Shock takes time." When the crowd began to disperse, I stayed seated under the dimmed lights. The last image on the projector, a photo of me and Henry, smiling in front of our old house, stayed frozen behind me. As I looked up at it, I whispered softly, "I kept my promise, Henry. I protected him." The night after the dinner felt like a storm had passed. The kind that doesn't leave debris, only silence. When I woke the next morning, sunlight poured through the blinds, gentle and indifferent. The world had moved on. But in my house, the air was still thick, with truth, regret, and the slow ache of betrayal. Daniel hadn't spoken much after the dinner. He'd driven me home quiet, hands gripping the steering wheel. Not a word during the whole ride. I didn't push him. Some truths don't need to be defended, they just need time to settle. When we reached the house, he walked me to the door. His eyes were red, not from anger, but from confusion. "Mom," he started, voice shaking slightly, "you knew all this and you didn't tell me?" I looked at him. My son, the boy I raised to believe the best in people. "If I'd told you," I said softly, "you wouldn't have believed me. You would have called it jealousy, or fear. I needed you to see it, not through my eyes, but through truth itself." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing across the porch. "God, Mom." Everyone was there. Her parents, my friends. "Yes," I interrupted gently. "And they all saw what I needed them to see, who she really was. Now no one can twist the story." He sat down on the steps, his head in his hands. "I loved her." "I know," I said quietly. "And she loved what you could give her. That's not the same thing." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of cicadas and the creak of the old porch swing. Finally, Daniel exhaled and looked up. "Thank you." "I think," he murmured. I smiled faintly. "One day you'll just say thank you, without the hesitation." He gave a weak laugh, the first in days. "You really set her up, didn't you?" "I didn't set her up," I said. "I revealed her." In the following days, the story spread fast. Someone at the Magnolia Club had recorded the presentation on their phone. By morning, the clip had made its way through Savannah's social circles. The engagement that ended in exposure. The press never printed names, but everyone who needed to know knew. Lucia and her parents disappeared within 24 hours. David later confirmed through his contacts that they had been detained by immigration authorities after the evidence was submitted. Their fraud history was now officially under investigation in both Mexico and the US. Daniel didn't go to work for a week. He stayed home, slept little, and spoke less. But slowly, I saw the fog begin to lift. He started taking morning walks again, eating regular meals, even helping me water the garden. It was there, among the roses, that he finally broke the silence. "Do you ever regret it, Mom?" he asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "Exposing her that way. In front of everyone." I paused, looking at the red petals glistening under sunlight. "Regret?" I said. "No. I regret that you had to hurt. But if a lie can survive in silence, then truth deserves a stage." He nodded slowly, understanding. You always were 2 steps ahead of everyone. I smiled. That's the only way I survived in real estate, and in life. A week later, Daniel packed his bags for London. Before leaving, he hugged me tightly, longer than usual. Thank you for saving me, he whispered. I held him close. It's what mothers do, even when their children don't know they need saving. When he left, the house felt heavier, quieter, but peaceful. I made myself tea, walked through the garden, and stopped by Henry's old bench. The same spot where he used to read the paper every morning. I sat down, closed my eyes and whispered, "He's safe now, Henry. You'd be proud." The wind stirred softly through the trees, carrying the scent of roses, and for a fleeting second, I could almost hear Henry's laugh, warm and approving, in the distance. But even peace has its shadows. That night, as I locked up and turned off the lights, my phone buzzed. A message, unknown number. It was short, written in Spanish. No todos los pajaros se quedan engelados, Señora Brooks. Not all birds stay caged, Mrs. Brooks. I stared at the words for a long time, my pulse calm but alert. Lucia's tone, defiant, unbroken. I smiled to myself and deleted the message. Good, I whispered. At least she's still afraid. Then I switched off the lamp, and for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. Weeks passed. Savannah settled back into its slow rhythm, church bells on Sundays, the faint chatter of neighbors, the scent of magnolias drifting through the evening air. My life, too, found its familiar pattern again: coffee at sunrise, roses at noon, silence by dusk. But silence no longer felt heavy. It felt earned. Daniel called more often now. There was a new tone in his voice, steadier, wiser, almost humbled. He told me he'd thrown himself into work again, that London felt different this time. Lonelier, yes, but freer. I needed this, he admitted one evening. I needed to fall hard enough to learn who I really am. I smiled, listening to his words like music. Then it wasn't a fall, I said softly. It was a lesson. He laughed quietly. You and your lessons, Mom. It's the only gift I know how to give. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch watching the light shift through the Spanish moss, I opened the old wooden box Henry had made for me years ago. Inside were letters, family photos, and a folded piece of paper with his handwriting. I hadn't opened it in years. The note was short, written the week before he passed. If anything ever threatens Daniel, promise me you'll protect him, not with anger, but with truth. Truth lasts longer than revenge. I traced the words with my fingertips, feeling his voice come alive in my memory. He always understood me. My calmness, my restraint, my silent strength. That promise had guided every step I'd taken. I whispered into the quiet, I kept it, Henry. I kept it exactly the way you would have. A few days later, I received a package from London. Inside was a letter from Daniel and a small framed photograph of the two of us taken years ago. Him at 10, me with dirt on my hands from gardening, both laughing. His note said, "For my mother, the only woman who taught me that love isn't blind, it just sees what others refuse to. P.S. I'm not done learning. And I promise next time, you'll meet someone who deserves your approval." I smiled, that kind of deep, quiet smile that stays with you long after it fades. That evening, I set the picture on the mantel beside Henry's photo and poured myself a glass of wine. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rustling the trees. I stood by the window and watched as the horizon turned golden over the Savannah River. People often think justice comes with noise, gavel strikes, shouting, punishment. But real justice is quieter. It doesn't need witnesses or applause. It just needs truth, revealed at the right moment in the right way. I learned long ago that revenge burns quick, but revelation endures. And sometimes, the most powerful act of revenge is to simply expose a lie and walk away with your dignity intact. As the sun dipped below the waterline, I whispered to myself, "Age doesn't weaken you, it sharpens you." I turned off the lights, let the soft southern night fold around the house, and smiled at the peace I had built. Not from wealth, not from victory, but from quiet strength. It was nearly 6 months before I heard anything more about Lucia. By then, Daniel had returned to London for good, throwing himself into rebuilding his life. He'd started running again, joined a small volunteer group, and even bought a little townhouse on the edge of Hampstead Heath. He sounded lighter when he called. Not the same man who had once lived in a daze of boardrooms and borrowed love. Healing had given him a kind of quiet dignity that success never could. As for me, I'd almost stopped thinking about her. Almost. One evening, I was in the kitchen cooking dinner when the phone rang. It was David. He rarely called unless something important had happened. "Evening, counselor," I greeted him, wiping my hands on a towel. "What's the verdict this time?" His tone was calm but edged with finality. "They've finished the investigation. Lucia and her parents were convicted of multiple counts of fraud. She's been deported to Mexico permanently, barred from entering both the UK and the US again." I leaned against the counter, breathing out slowly. "Justice?" I asked. "Justice," he confirmed. "The quiet kind you like." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft chirping from the yard. Finally I said, "Thank you, David. You've done more than you know." He chuckled softly. "You're the one who did it, Evelyn. You always were the smartest woman in every room." I smiled. "That's because I never waste my words. I let the truth do the talking." After the call ended, I stood for a while staring out the kitchen window. The sky outside was turning gold, the kind of Savannah sunset that made everything look softer than it really was. I thought of Lucia, that perfect smile, the practiced grace, the way she had underestimated me. There was no satisfaction in knowing she'd been punished. Only closure. I whispered to the fading light, "It's over now." And for the first time since that dinner, I believed it. A month later, Daniel visited again. He looked rested, tan from travel, calmer in spirit. He brought me flowers, simple white lilies, and placed them on the table with a sheepish grin. "Thought you'd appreciate something less complicated than roses," he said. I laughed softly. "Smart man. You're learning." We spent the afternoon talking on the porch, sipping tea, the air thick with warmth and cicadas. At one point he said, "Mom, I think you saved me from more than just a bad marriage. You saved me from becoming the kind of man who confuses love with admiration." I reached for his hand. "That's what parents do, Daniel. We see the cliff before you do, and sometimes we let you walk close enough to feel the edge." He nodded, eyes glistening. "You know, I tell people my mom's not just wise, she's dangerous when she's quiet." I smiled. "That's how quiet women survive, son. We don't fight noise with noise, we fight it with truth." That night, after he went to bed, I sat alone on the porch, the moon shining across the garden. Henry's wind chime sang softly in the breeze. I looked up at the stars and whispered, "We did it, Henry. He's safe. He's stronger. And maybe now, he finally understands what love should really look like." Somewhere deep inside, I felt something lift, a burden I hadn't realized I was still carrying. The house, once heavy with suspicion and deceit, now felt alive again. It smelled of lilies and lemon pie, of peace and second chances. The next morning, I woke early, walked to the garden, and trimmed a single red rose. I placed it by Henry's photograph and said quietly, "It's done." Then I smiled, not the smile of victory, but of release. Life, after all, always gives you back what you plant. And I had chosen to plant truth. Morning light spilled across the wooden floorboards, soft and golden. The kind that makes everything look gentler than it is. The house was quiet again. Daniel had flown back to London the night before, and the echo of his laughter still lingered faintly in the halls. For the first time in years, the silence didn't ache. It felt earned. I walked out to the porch, coffee in hand, the Georgia air thick with the scent of magnolias and fresh rain. Henry's wind chime swayed lazily in the breeze. A sound I'd once associated with grief, now turned into peace. I sat down in my usual chair and looked out across the garden. The same garden where I'd once hidden anger, suspicion, and heartbreak under soil and sunlight. Now it bloomed brighter than ever. Roses, lilies, and jasmine. Flowers that refused to give up, even after being cut back. I smiled to myself. Resilience has its own kind of beauty. People in town still whispered about that night at the Magnolia Club. They called it the quiet scandal, the evening when truth walked into a room dressed as celebration. Some praised me. Others pitied Lucia. A few thought I'd gone too far. But none of it mattered. Because I hadn't done it for revenge. Not really. I'd done it for clarity. In a world where lies wear designer shoes and smile for photographs, the truth doesn't shout. It waits. Patiently. Until someone gives it a voice. That night, I gave it mine. I thought of all the years I'd lived, the contracts I'd read, the people I'd trusted, the ones who'd tried to fool me. Life had taught me that not every battle is fought with anger. Some are won with silence, timing, and unshakable calm. Henry used to say, "You can't fight darkness with darkness, Evelyn. You outshine it." He was right. Lucia's deceit could have made me bitter. But instead, it reminded me who I was, a woman who had built her life on truth and refused to let anyone take that from her. When you reach my age, you start seeing things differently. You stop chasing apologies. You stop explaining yourself to people who have already chosen not to listen. You realize that peace doesn't come from winning battles. It comes from walking away once you've proven your point. I didn't need to see Lucia punished to feel justice. I'd already seen her defeated the moment her lies met daylight. The sun was climbing higher now, casting streaks of light through the branches. I took a slow sip of coffee, feeling the warmth settle deep inside. My life wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And in this world, that's worth more than gold. I looked toward the sky, where clouds drifted softly, and whispered, "Henry, we did it. He's safe, and I'm finally at peace." The wind carried the chime again, gentle, steady, and sure. It sounded almost like an answer. And as I sat there, surrounded by the quiet strength of my own making, I thought about everything this journey had taught me. That age doesn't dull a woman, it sharpens her. That truth doesn't need volume, just courage. And that sometimes, the most powerful kind of revenge is simply living well after being underestimated.